Hello and welcome back to The Millennial and the Mom. I'm Maddie, the Millennial.
And I'm Katie, the mom.
And I'm literally so excited to talk about today's topic.
I know we are so true crime obsessed. And honestly, I fall asleep every night listening to a true crime podcast. And basically, now I know a lot of the setups for what happens, but I know very little about how they're solved because I always fall asleep before the end.
Oh, so yeah, I don't have that issue. I could tell you like the entire plot of multiple cases. I cannot consume enough true crime content. So I'm so excited to get into it and talk about why we are so fascinated.
Well, okay, the mom and me like has to ask, like, why do we like true crime so much? Like, is this a sign of a bigger problem? Like, are we using other people's tragedies for our entertainment? I feel kind of bad.
No, I know there's like a broader discussion that we're not going to be having because we're going to keep this light and fun, but like the ethics of true crime, all of that. But I do think, I mean, everyone for the most part that I talked to has, at least dabbled in true crime or they've watched like a Netflix special or they listen to a podcast every week or whatever. It's very ingrained in our culture as Americans.
Well, and you know what's funny is I noticed recently is that they've actually replaced soap operas in the afternoon, at least on NBC. It's now there's a Dateline every single afternoon, like in a spot that used to be a soap opera. So I guess we've
There's a
just,
Dateline channel where
oh
all day
yeah,
you can watch Dateline.
but this is on like the main network channel. So I guess we've just replaced like drama and like scandalous, soap opera plot lines for true crime. So not good or bad, just different.
Yeah, no, and I'm interested to hear your perspective as someone who, you're from a different generation than us millennials, but like when you were growing up in my age, was there true crime? Like I know there weren't podcasts, there was not like recording TV shows, like there was no Netflix, but like did cases get the same amount of attention that they do now, like in the 70s and 80s?
Well, thank you for making sure that we note
Not
this
to
age
out your
difference.
age.
Thank you. I'm a child of the 70s. Well, you know what? That's actually kind of interesting because they didn't because nothing got the attention that it gets today, right? We're just constant 24-hour media. So I don't necessarily remember true crime being a thing when I was a kid. I mean, obviously there was crime and there was news
There were all those
stories.
serial killers in the 70s. I mean,
Oh,
Ted
I
Bundy.
terrible, terrible. But I mean, I think one of the things I was thinking about is we had like ABC after school specials. Like that was our version of true crime, air quotes. It wasn't really crime, but it was like these like, kind of difficult life lessons. And quite frankly, some of those were scary. I remember
Like
like the ABC.
what?
I don't know, just about like people like abusing kids or
Oh
like
my
taking
God.
advantage of kids. They were supposed to teach us a lesson. Wait, you know what an ABC after school special is, right?
I don't know. We had PBS growing up.
Oh my God. You're too young to understand the ABC after
I
school
mean, you would have
special.
been watching it with me. Was it in the
I was
90s?
busy I was putting you in front of the TV so I get something done. I wasn't sitting there watching it with you. But no, it was like you would come home from school and this thing would be on at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, like on, ABC, obviously. And, you couldn't record it. So you had to like watch it right then. But they came up every now and then. And I don't know. Well, I'll have to do a little research on what happened to the ABC after school special. But
Yeah, maybe rack your memory. But no, it's interesting because I definitely remember being young, like probably like I mean, we were living in Connecticut. We moved around a lot, so I can benchmark my ages off what state we were living in. But
okay, so you were
I was
under
probably in
fourth
like
grade.
first or second grade. And I definitely remember because we used to get like the People magazines delivered and whatever. And it was like Natalie Holloway and like Elizabeth Smart and whatever. Like
Yeah.
those cases were still getting talked about. And so I definitely remember like being a young kid and being like, oh, like there's crime out there and whatever. And I think it was just like that was probably like I was 5 in like 2001. Like I was like probably the early of the like 24-hour news cycle. And we're going to talk about
Yes.
all these cases on the Today Show. So I feel like pretty much my entire childhood growing up, like there was some amount of true crime talked about. Definitely more now than, when I was in like middle school, but it wasn't like something new to me.
I think it's just the formats, right? And thank you for bringing up People Magazine because I do love People Magazine. And yes, I subscribe.
We're
And
a People magazine and we're also a Today Show family, in case you were wondering where our
oh,
alliances
loyalty to the Today Show till the day I die. We'll
maybe
do.
one day we'll get to go on with
Oh,
Savannah and Hoda.
I will be on the plaza holding a sign. I'm sorry.
My dentist office is across from the plaza, so maybe you'll catch me there when I'm going to get my teeth cleaned.
Fun times. But I do think, I mean, yes, there's a lot of different mediums that we had true crime. Like there was a lot of books, right? I mean, you could read the story, read a
Yeah.
book, a reenactment, things in the magazine. You just didn't have like the 24/7 access to true crime like we have now. But I
Well,
do,
and it's always been like mysteries and thrillers since like
yes.
medieval times probably have always been a thing. But it's like, when did we start kind of, blowing up real life cases to the same level as like, an Agatha Christie novel or whatever?
Right. Well, and I think, as much as yes, there probably are some underlying issues in that we are using true crime as entertainment, there have been very like high profile examples. I think there was one just very recently about a girl who was abducted by her mother who didn't have custody, and they found her 6 years
I saw
later.
that
Right. I mean, so because the story was on a
someone
show,
recognized her.
and
Yeah.
someone recognized her. So obviously, I mean, if it brings awareness to cases and helps some bring some closure to families, ends up protecting some people, finding people, who obviously have been abducted or something's happened to them. I mean, that is a very positive outcome. It's just hopefully it doesn't, skew too far towards the voyeurism into people's tragedies.
Yeah, no, it's a fine line. And I did, if you listened last week, we were talking about hobbies and do we have hobbies and whatever. So we both discussed that like listening to true crime podcasts is one of our hobbies. But like I mentioned, I take things too far. And so I made my husband record a true crime podcast with me last year. We only recorded one episode. We never released it. But I will say, like, I I enjoy consuming true crime podcasts. I listen to them daily, but I something to me felt wrong about researching the case and recording it. Like there are people who do it so well, and we'll get into like our favorite podcasts and true crime, mediums. But just for me personally, I was like, I just feel like I'm not doing this justice. Like this is someone's life I'm talking about. So it is interesting. And I think it's a specific type of person who's able to, do it well and do it respectfully and not like make light of it or talk about theories that are just, pure speculation. Like it's a fine line for sure.
Well, and there are some true crime, particularly in the podcast genre, that are, they're kind of comedy based. And
Yeah.
that's a
I don't
little,
I don't love
I
those
don't
ones.
love those either because, on the one hand, sometimes the way you deal with a difficult topic is you can kind of like make light of it and find some humor in order
Hmm.
to maybe open up, being able to talk about something. But some of those I think take it a little bit too far. It's interesting though, the intersection of true crime and real life. But we were listening to the podcast about the Golden State Killer.
Hmm.
This is like 5 years ago. I think we were actually driving, your dad and I were driving to visit you at college. And we listened to the podcast on the drive there. It was like a 6 episode. It was the one by the woman who actually was writing the book about the Golden State Killer, and then she died. And
I'll be gone in the dark.
yes, I'll be gone in the dark. And so the interesting thing was we didn't know a ton about that case. And we listened to, these multiple
Which is
episodes.
interesting because dad grew up in Southern California.
Well, and maybe he remembers it from when he was a kid. I don't know. But again, the
Yeah.
the way to get that media was so different back then. But we had really gotten all caught up on this case. And the really freaky thing is, 2 days later, after we finished that drive, listening
Hmm.
to that podcast, they solved that and they caught the guy. And it was like mind blowing because I had just heard the whole history of everything. So again, I mean, they can be educational. I think too, some of the ones I know that we both like, there is an element by the host sometimes about, hey, like, here's some things you can do to keep yourself safe. Not that, victims are ever to blame for the situations they find themselves
No.
in, but there are some, interesting takeaways sometimes about how might you think about your own personal safety, and do your best, obviously to safeguard against something happening.
Yeah, no, no. And I think I always like the ones like where they tell you, okay, we've told you all the facts, whatever, like let us tell you our theories or whatever. And they're very clear of like no law enforcement has ever said this is what happened, but like we're just gonna dabble into it. Like that's fine. Like as long as you tell me like this is not like fact.
Right.
But I think it's interesting because I know you and dad are like huge Dateline people and like you watch Dateline like every night. I
Okay,
feel like
wait. We don't watch Dateline every night. I mean,
most
no, no,
nights,
no, no, no. We
it's
like
like nightly
maybe
news with Lester Holt and then the
you
Dateline.
know I love Lester. Okay,
I
so
know we're an NBC family.
Lester is my homie. I can't really, my night cannot start until I see Lester Holt on the news. But sorry. But I think honestly, the new episodes of Dateline come out on Friday night. Yes, I do know that. So yeah, if we can catch the Dateline when it comes out. But here's the thing I will say about Dateline, and I love them, and I am a loyal NBC person. They take like a 30 to 45 minute story and they stretch it over 2 hours. And it's like sometimes that frustrates me. I'll listen to the podcast, which it can move along a little bit sometimes, although usually it's the direct recording from the show.
I was gonna
Um,
say,
yeah,
yeah.
but I mean, I think that it's a predictable format too. That's the other thing. And some of these podcasts and shows are predictable in the sense of the way they kind of lay out the case and who they talk to. So
I guess my main what I was trying to get at was do you prefer to listen to true crime? Like I don't always love watching it. And sometimes too, like people I literally am like known in my office. They're like, Maddie, have you heard about this case? And I'm like, "Ugh, of course I have. Like I've listened to 6 podcasts about it. But like I am not someone who enjoys necessarily watching like really dark and twisty thrillers, or like I can read them. I can listen to them on audio, but like something about watching it, like I can't always stomach it, which is odd because I love
yeah.
listening to the podcast.
So I think, yeah, I don't necessarily need the visual of it. Dateline isn't like super gruesome. What was that movie that one time? I can't remember if you were home. Certainly some portion of you girls were
It
home.
was the one, it
It
was
was like a series.
the Cape Horn,
Oh no, Cape Fear, forget it. I
Cape
won't watch that
Fear. I
movie.
couldn't finish
That
it.
is terrifying to me. So, okay, so to your point, absolutely no. I'm not going to watch that movie.
But that's fictional or it's fictionalized.
Well, I mean, listen, you've listened to some true crime recently. It's always truth is stranger than fiction. But I don't like horror type movies. I don't like super
No,
graphic things. I like to read thrillers. I love a mystery. I love a good thriller.
I love to read a
Yeah,
thriller.
Lucy
Agree.
Foley, bring all the Lucy Foley books on.
Mhm.
Um,
Or like a John
oh,
Grisham.
oh,
That's I'm my father's
yes,
brother.
yes, we
I
all,
love
this
John
whole family
Grisham.
loves a good John Grisham. But I think that, reading it, listening to it. Now, I used to listen a lot more. Quite frankly, my podcast listening has suffered a little bit because I'm not commuting. I used to commute like 35, 40 minutes each way to work. And I would listen to my podcast during that time. So now I'm probably not listening to as many as I used to. And for some reason, I listen to them at night. I almost always like to listen to true crime going to bed. I fall asleep pretty quickly though, so I never really get any resolution. Then I got to go back, and figure out where I left off. But I do think that in terms of like the types of cases, I I know some cases, like cases that involve kids, like I really struggle. Those are hard to hear. Any type of like abuse situation, I don't love to listen to that.
Yeah.
But I do like ones that have a resolution, although some of my favorite ones are podcasts of unsolved cases as well. But I do, when it's got some conclusion and they can kind of tell you, what's happened now, and is the person, have they had the trial even. I will say, I know you are doing this right now too, talk about true crime, is that Love and Death show on HBO Max.
Yes.
I am obsessed, and we're waiting.
I didn't watch the one last night, so don't tell me what happens.
Okay, I won't say anything.
I mean, I know it's I read
Well, I
about it.
know we know what happens, but the way they're kind of rolling it out, I think we only have 1 or 2 episodes left to come out. But
I think there's only like 8 episodes.
yeah, and so I mean, but that's really, really, I mean, that's actors portraying the story, and they always have a disclaimer like, well, it's interesting because at the beginning of this show, it says this is a true story, and a lot of times they'll say this is based on a true story. So I'm wondering why they don't say based on, but they've said it's pretty accurate.
Well, I think that's what I think. That's why I don't think they're saying it, is because they're following the storyline. Like, yeah, there's a theatrical element to
Right.
it, but I think I don't think they've
Yeah.
changed anything.
Yeah. So it's,
Major.
I mean, it's very good, and I mean, it's a bit graphic, and obviously it's very tragic, but so I think,
I will say it's interesting. I mean, I don't obviously like there are cases that are too hard to listen to, or I'll turn them off. I'm like, I'm just like not in a place where like I want to be listening to this right now. But I will say, like, and I don't know what this says about me, but like the ones that are most like jarring, or not jarring, but like the ones where it's like someone gets like kidnapped on their way home from school, or like they were taken from a public place or something, like those are the ones where like I'm hanging on every word. And I think like, and I was talking to someone about this, it might have been you, it might have been someone else. It's because it's like those are the ones that like play on our worst
Yeah.
fears. It's like you were told stranger danger or like whatever, and it's like it validates that like that is something you should have worried about.
Yes.
Or like I'll tell my husband all the time, like I'll walk our dog, like not late at night, but like I have like the birdie alarm on my keys and I have pepper spray or whatever. And like, my husband's a 6'3" white male. Like his frame of reference
Hmm.
of what's scary is different than mine. And he'll be like, "Oh my God, like, well, you don't need pepper spray. Like, we live in a safe area." And I'm like, "Listen to this true crime podcast about this girl who got abducted from the busy Target parking lot, and like, you'll think differently, like, whatever." And so it's like those are the ones I feel like I enjoy listening to the most, or I'm most captivated by, because they're the ones that are like something that could happen to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is there actually any more crime happening? Or are we just hearing about all the crime now that's happening?
No, I think in one of the podcasts, and we're going to get into like our favorite ones in a minute, but a lot of the I think it's the Parcast Network does a lot of they have a bunch of the true crime podcasts, and they'll do kind of like series across their like line of shows. And they had this one about like the crazy 70s or whatever, and like that's when like all of the serial killers, like or a lot of the big ones that we talk about today, like Ted Bundy, like the Hillside Strangler, like all of those, like it was like crazy 10 years of like what the hell was going on, like why were all these white men like slashing people left and right. But it's like I feel like there's probably serial killers right now, maybe we just don't know them or
Okay,
whatever,
now
but
I'm
like
terrified. This is making me uncomfortable. We're talking about serial killers.
no, it almost feels like maybe there's less. Like a lot of the podcasts I listened to like happened in the 70s and
Okay,
80s.
I need to do some research. Now I'm going to have to go down a big rabbit hole on crime statistics and I'll report back. But, it is interesting though, because I think that unfortunately, with anything nowadays, with news and media and access, kids younger and younger are getting access to, Netflix shows. And
Hmm.
I did have, it was kind of a funny story, but it was also very instructive. Recently I was stepping back into the classroom and teaching sixth grade math to kind of help out at a school. And one of the students asked me, he started by saying he had come in after school for some help and he's working away. And just out of the blue, he says to me, he goes, "Were you alive in 1993?" And I was like, "Well, first of all, thank you for thinking I might not be alive in 93, but yes, I was alive." He said, what were you doing? Where were you in 1993? I said, "Well, I had just graduated from college." And he said, next sentence without a thought, he goes, "Did you know Jeffrey Dahmer?" And I'm like, "Okay, listen, let's talk about this. Why are you asking me about Jeffrey Dahmer?" Well, he had been watching the Netflix series.
Yeah, and that was one like I couldn't
No,
finish it. That one
terrible.
was
And an
graphic.
11-year-old, these are 11-year-olds, right? He's 11 years
Yeah.
old. I'm like, wow, I don't really think that's a show that you should be watching. I mean, obviously his parents have the ultimate say, parents are guardians, but I was in, and I had to explain to him also, this is a big country. Just because I was around in 93 and Jeffrey Dahmer was, I did not mention to him though, if I had known Jeffrey Dahmer, maybe I wouldn't be here talking to him. But I think there should be a little bit more of a filter, because it must be very scary. I mean, in some ways, I hope it's a little bit scary to kids if they're seeing these types of stories. I don't want them to become numb to it.
No, and I will say, as like someone who, like what we were talking about in the beginning of this episode, like I'm a kid of the mid to late 90s. I was starting to have much more like formative memories in the early 2000s, which was when a lot of big events happened, like
Yeah.
9/11. We lived right outside of DC when the DC sniper was there. Like I I still don't love flying, because it's like when I was younger, like those were the
Yeah.
images you would see on the TV. They talked about it for years, the videos and all of that. And then it's like the same thing. Like I was like, I feel like we went through phases of like having to make sure the windows were locked at night and like whatever. And some of that's because it's like what you're exposed to when you're a kid. Like you don't have the emotional capability to like be like, oh, I know that like 98% of abductions are by a family member or
Right.
whatever. Like it's not like the boogeyman is taking every case you hear, but that's what you're seeing on Netflix and like you're 7, like I would be terrified to leave
Yeah.
my
And the
house.
DC sniper was terrifying. I mean, you guys were young during then. And I remember,
Yeah, we had to be like walked into school with people with
yeah,
machine
we
guns.
had
Like it
police
was
at your
terrible.
school. You got out of the car. You were to quickly with police around get into school. And I remember, like dad was very insistent. Like I was not to go to a gas station and put gas in the car. He would put gas in the car because that was a terrifying time, right? To live through that. It was right
Yeah.
in our area. I mean, I think they spotted that actual car
Yeah.
like half a mile from us at one of the strip malls that we always went to. He didn't end up doing a shooting there, but had been in that area. So yeah, I mean, I think those are very traumatic experiences. But again, I hope that the proliferation of true crime isn't making us numb to the human side behind it and the terrible tragedies. And I don't know, I mean, obviously I don't know anybody who's experienced some, I mean, I know people obviously who've experienced tragedies, but in terms of, knowing somebody who's had their case play out on true crime, I don't know. I'm sure those families feel very mixed about it if they're looking for the person who did
Hmm.
it and that can help them. I know some of those families really seek out that type of attention because they feel like it can help them solve the case or find their loved one. But I'm sure in the ones in which the story is fairly well complete, those families, that's got to be difficult.
Yeah, where it's like they open and shut,
Mhm.
you know, it's like, do we still need to be like talking? I guess, but some of them, like, it is a good lesson, or it's like, hey, like a lot of them, I remember when I was in college, I went to like a really large state school and there was really like large Greek life. And we had to go sit through this seminar of like dating violence. And it was like a case, it was like a regular sorority girl, like all the people sitting in the auditorium. And it's like no one, all of her friends missed all of
Mhm.
these signs and her boyfriend ended up killing
Yeah.
her. And it's like, so yeah, to some extent, like they know who did it. They know it's open and shut, like there's resolution, whatever, but it's like there's a really important
Mhm.
lesson that like people need to hear from
Yeah.
that. So it's like a fine line of like what needs to be talked about, what can we kind of be like, you know what, this happened, like we don't need to discuss it in graphic detail. Like I don't know the answer
Yeah,
to it.
I don't either. But maybe we should talk about some of our favorite true crime. Let's stick to podcasts, maybe.
Well, I know I bet I can guess both of our favorites. We are
Well, you know it
avid,
because we both
avid.
belong to the club. We've actually paid up for this podcast.
I know we are absolute crime junkies. Ashley Flowers, like, is my
Oh,
queen. I love her
Ashley
so
Flowers
much.
is the bomb. I mean, anything, well, I mean, in her whole Audio Chuck, brand and production company,
Yeah.
most, I would say a lot of our favorites are within that family and within that production company. But yeah,
When did you start listening to Crime Junkie? Did I tell you about it?
I don't remember. I think we both it was probably during the pandemic. I think it was,
I distinctly remember I started listening to it, and I think, we can get into like podcast listening and whatever. And I think one of the reasons I enjoy Crime Junkie, and hopefully, someone out there thinks about our show is like I did enjoy like the back and forth
yes.
banter. They're clearly Britt and Ashley are like really good friends. This is a shared hobby of theirs, whatever. And it was kind of nice. Like I discovered it, like you said, during COVID. I was working from home all day by myself, and like it felt like I was listening to two friends
Yes.
talk. And like they've gotten a lot bigger since then. This was probably like late 2020, 2021, beginning 2021. And I think they started in 2017 or 2018. And now they have a much broader reach and they've expanded shows and they do a lot of important work of like talking about underrepresented
Right.
cases and things like that. But in the beginning, it was like the Lacey Peterson case and like, they did a lot of the big cases. And so I just like listening to it as like listening to two friends talk or how we talk about a case.
Yeah, I would agree that the conversational style of that show I do really enjoy. And there's some predictability. Like that show, again, it's like
She's a great
she's a
storyteller.
great storyteller. Kind of how things are going to unfold. And I like that. That's when I'm like getting into a new show. I do get kind of turned off sometimes. There's a few that I've listened to that are a little bit too cheeky or they're a little bit too, putting like a humorous cast on it. And
Well, now, like, I mean, I tried to record one. I feel like, and okay, like, no judgment because we're sitting over here recording a new podcast. But now I feel like everyone knows true crime's a big thing. Like, everyone's trying to put out a true crime podcast. And you can tell a lot of them are ones like they've not done their
right, right.
research. It's not well told, like, whatever.
Well,
Like, I know, I also know trusting Crime Junkie, like, they're going to give me, they sometimes they share their opinions or they'll, take a take on it or whatever. But like, For the most part, you're getting the
Yeah.
facts. Like this is they're doing hopefully the story
Well,
justice.
and they actually now have like a dedicated reporter who's digging into
Yeah,
cases. Shout out to Delia D'Ambra, but I
love
love her
her.
too. So, I mean, I think that yeah, I feel like I can trust the information there.
Yeah.
They're pretty upfront when they're kind of veering off, and they also do a really great job of citing their sources. There's a few I've listened to podcasts that I won't name that I'm like, are you just regurgitating a podcast you heard? With your own spin on it.
Mhm.
So, um,
I will say my favorite crime junkies, and I again like Ashley Flowers, she worked in radio. Like this is clearly like has been her life's work, it sounds like. Um, but they do such a good job. And like there's been a couple like two-parters where it'll be like I remember you guys like this just shows like how much of an obsession I am. But I re-listen because Crime Junkie is one of my absolute favorite ones. Like I would rather re-listen to one of their shows than like listen to like a so-so new one that I haven't heard. So like I listen to them a lot when I walk my dog, and I'm very much a creature of habit. Like Crime Junkie is my podcast go to. Friends is my TV show I rewatch. I've seen it so many times. Like I've listened to all the Crime Junkies like multiple times. But I was just re-listening to their case about the Lundys. It was like I think it happened in like New Zealand or Australia or something, and it's two-parter. So they'd go through the whole first part, and you kind of reach a conclusion, or you feel like you do, and then they're like they end the show, and they're like, and next week, like we're gonna tell you everything that like we didn't tell you today and like
that
whatever.
was a
And then it's just
great
like
case. That was a great
it's
case.
so
Yes.
they do such a good
Yes.
job of figuring out like where I think they did the same thing kind of with the Lacey Peterson case where it's like they're telling you all the information and it's all factual, but it's like they're taking it like at different
Yeah.
times and it's they are just like
Yeah.
magicians.
Yeah. What are some other ones that you like?
Well, you mentioned Delia D'Ambra. I love Park Predators, but again, that's an audio Chuck show. It's a very similar style, but something about like her
I
voice and
know.
like do the nature sounds like you're in the national park, and I'm like, oh my God, like it's actually I think they released them in
I am
June
dying for a
or
new,
starting
I
in
am
June. It's like
waiting for a
a
new,
summer
I know, I
series.
think it is a summer series. I'm waiting for a new, a series or what do you call it? Season of that to start. Um,
And that she does a really good job with too because she doesn't have a co-host. That's
right.
just her.
But there, you know what? It's something about her voice and the storyline actually makes you feel like you're out in the park. It's like kind of
Yes.
quiet and you can really
And then they'll be
imagine.
like you're walking and like they'll put like a twig snapping in the background or whatever. They do such a good job. But she also does and I think it's one of your favorite shows. She is also the narrator for Counterclock.
Love that one. Love that.
Did you listen? They just released the new season.
I'm in the middle of it. Have you listened to the whole thing?
I don't think I finished it,
I
but I've
have not been.
listened to
I've
like a
listened to the
fair
first
amount.
couple of episodes. Yeah. Another one from Audio Chuck is The Deck, which I know you don't like as much. I like it. It's not necessarily one of my top favorites, but it's all unsolved cases. So
Well, I don't not like it. I love an unsolved, or I want the cases to be solved, but I do like the element of like, wow, like if we get this out there, like it could make a difference. It could solve the case, whatever. But I think my issue sometimes with Counterclock and the deck is like I'm very much someone like I want the story told to me. And that's why I love like Britt and Ashley talking about it or Delia talking about it on Park Predators. Like I don't necessarily like enjoy from an audio perspective when they're jumping between like the interviews, like they're interviewing the family and the detectives. I like watching that if I'm watching like a documentary or whatever. But I don't know, maybe I'm like too ADD. Like it's hard for me to follow sometimes. And I'm like, who's talking? Like,
okay, I agree with you. The multi-episode ones, not like a two-parter like they do on Crime Junkie, but when they're like a Counterclock, which is like a season is a case. And there's another one that I like. Actually, it was a case up in Toronto called the Billionaire Murders.
I haven't listened to that.
That's a good one. And it's multiple episodes. I can't remember how many it is, maybe 6 or 8. But sometimes it is hard to have the thread continue.
Yeah.
Whereas something like a documentary or even a fictionalized show like Love and Death, like I can remember from week to week because I've had that visual. Okay, I remember that character.
Yeah.
So that is interesting. And then there are some where they actually have like different actors portraying,
Well,
different.
okay, I see the difference is I do like those. Like I was mentioning the Parcast, and that's like a little bit more like it's like a fictionalized TV show. Like
Yes.
they're no one knows for sure what the victim said to whoever. Like they're taking their own kind of artistic take on it. But I do really enjoy I think I think their shows, it's like solved murders and unsolved murders.
Yep.
And that is more like it's a little bit less lighthearted. I would say it's more like I'm listening to almost like a thriller or whatever. Whereas like Crime Junkie, like, it's two friends or two gal pals, like,
Right.
but the Parcast shows are a little bit more like, it's like a Netflix series or something. It's a real
Yes.
production.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
And
those
then
are two.
you have a couple other that I don't, you have two on our list of favorite podcasts that I don't actually know. I don't listen to them.
Oh, Gruesome and Murder with My Husband.
Okay. What is gruesome?
Okay, Gruesome, I love them. They're a little bit more like it's almost like it's the same kind of setup as Crime Junkie. Like they're two friends. They're obviously true crime obsessed, but like they take a little bit more like Crime Junkie is a very professional show and it has been like since the start. Like obviously the audio quality's gotten a lot better. They now have studios and like whatever, but at its core like the format's very similar. The way they approach the cases has been consistent over the six whatever years they've been doing it. Gruesome is like Crime Junkie. It's two female friends. I think they also live in Indiana. But they like kind of start the episodes off with some like they're just talking about their life and their kids and like whatever. And then they like get into the episode. But then the last like 30 minutes of it is they're just like, oh my God, like I would have taken that guy out if I had seen him. Like they get into like a little bit more of like they're like just like banter. And they're funny, but they do some really interesting cases, but it's a much longer, I would say their episodes are consistently over an hour.
Okay. I was going
And
to
it's
say the
not it's
last
not
half
an
an hour.
hour
Yeah.
of the case. It's probably the case is probably like 30 minutes and there's like 10 minutes at the start and like 30 minutes at the end. But Murder with My Husband, I really
Wait,
like.
one question about gruesome before you move on to Murder with My Husband. The reason I think I haven't listened to it is I was imagining it was really gruesome cases. Is it any more graphic or gruesome than like a Crime Junkie?
No, and they've done some of the same cases. I will say sometimes Crime Junkie won't do a case now that they've gotten so big that is really, really well known and there's like a lot of content about. So I have heard some cases on gruesome that I hadn't heard before.
Okay. Maybe I
Um
was being turned off by the name and I should give it a chance.
No, and they're ones like they do. Well, I forgot to even do the big, whatever. So one of the hosts, when she was a kid, she was kidnapped and she escaped.
What?
Yeah. So the first episode or the second episode they do was talking about her case. So that's kind of like their
Oh my
background of
gosh.
because
Okay, now
they're
I'm gonna
like
have to listen.
childhood friends. So like the
Okay.
friend knew she was kid, like whatever. So
Okay.
there's some more backstory there. I like them. They're funny. I would say it's more so like I'll like sometimes I'll get on my Peloton and I'll do like Just Ride or whatever. Like that's a good one. It's like, it's not all serious. Like,
Right.
just two gals talking. But the other one is Murder with My Husband, which I don't consistently listen to. It's one I'll like download a few episodes of, like if I know I'm going on a plane and like I want some like ones I haven't heard. But it's really good. It's this woman, she's probably my age, maybe a little older, and her husband's like not into true crime. And so it's like she's telling him the case and she'll be like, and then like, he hit her like 20 times with like a axe or whatever. He's like, what is wrong with people? Like, why are you telling me this? Like it has a
So
little bit.
he's kind of the foil and he's hearing it for the first time from her.
Yes. I mean, who knows
Okay.
how many takes they do to record it, but it's like it's clearly like she's the one who's really into it and she's like making her husband like sit through. Like they're pretty popular now.
Oh my gosh. That's like I should have done an episode yesterday when I dragged your father to Home Goods and he had a lot to say about his experience having to go along
Oh
with
my
me.
God, he hates Home Goods.
He hates it. I said, well, you can come in and I'll be quick, or you can sit in the car. He goes, but then I'm going to be sitting in the car outside Home Goods. I'm going to come in and make sure this moves along quickly.
No, it's so funny. But I guess that's something interesting because dad is someone who, I mean, my entire childhood was watching like Jack Ryan thrillers, and we just mentioned like we
Mhm.
love John Grisham books, and we would watch the movies and everything. Like he was also a police officer, like a reserve police officer, but he's not really someone I feel like that listens to true crime.
No, he doesn't listen. He's not super big into podcasts. He does love a good documentary though, like, or he loves a good show on Netflix or something. We just started one last night, actually, that's based on, I think it's called The White House Murders. It's some case out of England. Did you watch that? on Netflix, or no, it's
Oh,
on HBO
it's on
Max.
HBO Max.
HBO
Of course
Max.
I've seen it. If there is a
I can't believe this.
documentary out there, because like anytime like I'm sick or like I'm just like I just need a day like in bed on the weekend or whatever, like it's not something's wrong with me. Like people are probably like this girl is like too obsessed. But like it's just something about, you're starting that new like 6-part series. You're like,
Yes,
I got a
yes.
lot to dive into. Like this
Wait,
is
so
gonna
did
be
you
good.
you've watched that?
Yeah. And
Okay,
there's
well, don't tell me because we only did like the first episode.
I will say though, I watched it. We were living where we live now, so it must have been 2021, when it was still kind of like COVID. I watched it. I thought it was really interesting, whatever. But I feel like I listened to a podcast about it somewhat recently, like where they do like multiple episodes, and I feel like the story was a little different,
Oh, interesting.
or not different, but maybe it was told differently. I remember being like, oh, I remember I watched this show, but some of this feels like new information. But that's an interesting case for
So
sure.
we're getting into that. So he likes that type of stuff, but he's not necessarily a big listen to podcasts. I mean,
Of
he does
any type?
not really of any type.
Is he gonna listen to our podcast?
Well, if I hope he listens to our
He's gonna be our
podcast.
only other listener.
Well, I don't, let's not count on him. I mean, let's, first of all, your two sisters, they better be our first two followers. Yeah, we're going to have to cultivate some followers, but
No, but
again,
we'll link. Maybe what we'll do is we'll go through and we'll link our favorite episode from each one of the
yes.
podcasts we
Oh, for
discussed in the show
sure.
notes if you're
For
looking
sure.
for something new. But yeah, I mean, if you we're gonna post, we'll also, post our Instagram, our favorite shows. Comment yours if there's one that like we haven't discussed, because I'm constantly looking
I
for
am
new
too. I am too.
shows.
So I
I'm
love
like
a,
up to
yeah.
date on all of my podcasts. So like anytime something new comes out, or there's one I found where it's like there's 20 episodes I haven't listened to. I'm like, yes, like I'm set for my commute for the next like couple weeks or
Right,
whatever.
right. I love a recommendation. There is one, I think, every once in a while I'll do a podcast on Audible, and there is one, and I'm blanking on the name, but I'll put in the show notes. There is one that I
Oh, I
think
didn't
is,
know they did podcasts.
oh yeah, there's a
Do you have to
crime one.
listen to them on Audible, or are they on like Spotify?
No, they're just on Audible. And they also do some like only on Audible, like Audible originals, which are like some,
Oh,
yeah, there's some good stuff on there too. So I've gone down and looked down that rabbit hole because I was looking for a new one and couldn't really find one. But and you listen on Spotify, right?
yeah, I'm a big Spotify
I am
person.
Spotify, yeah, I'm Spotify only.
But well, it's interesting because I actually like I just had like fraud on my credit card and my number changed and whatever. So a lot of my like reoccurring memberships, I had to go back in and updated them or whatever. And I just, now that you mentioned we were both in the fan club, I realized I must have not updated my Crime Junkie one because I've been listening to them on Spotify. And I know they like
Mm,
now have their own app. But I do love when it's like, you've gotten really into something and you hear they have like a Patreon or there's more content somewhere and you're like, yes, like I get to like
yes,
unlock 10 more episodes.
I know the
And
special
it's a good way to
Patreon only,
support,
yeah.
like, I mean, I think at one point, Crime Junkie, they were talking about like each case they research for like 30 hours or something. Like these people like are dedicating like a lot of
Oh
time.
yeah, yeah.
And so it's a nice way to like feel like you're supporting your like favorite creators. I mean, this podcast, we're not really doing any prep work, guys. So in
Oh,
case you're
okay, hold on. I
wondering.
wouldn't say there's no prep work. And remember, this is now episode 3, and I still, in my own mind, have no idea how this gets to the actual podcasting platform. So much to learn still. But anyways, this was fun, Maddie. It's always fun chatting.
I know. Well, now I feel like I need to go like binge a podcast or something. But yeah, we've had a lot of fun. We're now 3 episodes in. We have a bunch more topics to discuss. So definitely come back next week. We'll be discussing something totally different. But if you're enjoying the show, we would really love for you to leave us a review, whether you're, we just mentioned we love Spotify, but if you're listening on Apple Podcast, leave us a review there. Check us out on Instagram. We always share kind of what we're talking about in picture form. And you can check us out on stories, and we're going to do some fun stuff there. So we're at the Millennial and the Mom on Instagram.
And if you want to give us a suggestion of a topic you'd like to hear a millennial and a mom take on, we would love that. And even more important than a review is tell a friend, because then we could go from like 2 followers to 3 followers.
Yeah.
And then maybe we could get into double digits, and that's going to be exciting.
Yeah, well, this was so much fun. We will come back next week and we'll see you then. But I'll talk to you later, Mom. TTYL.
Yes, and I learned that last episode. TTYL, Maddie, I will talk to you later. Bye.
Bye, mom.